Good evening, Captain Matt Edwards, retired, here with the next installment of the Observation Post Weekly Reports for the 19th of January 2023. So, what I've been doing, if you're just tuning in, is going by a numbered list that I've made up of issues that I'm trying to get out there so that people are aware of it, aware of these things so that the government can't keep getting away with things. Now, so, carrying on with number 194. Wijenshia. Don't know if I'm spelling that right, but there was a Supreme Court of case, Canada issue. Gaslighting us might be obstruction of justice. Okay, in that case, there was a lawyer who lied under oath and was convicted of obstruction of justice. But during the case, one of the comments that I latched onto is that they said most people, most citizens, aren't a member, don't become part of the judicial process. Most people don't have any interaction with the court system, but they have a lot more interaction with the tribunals and different boards and stuff. So basically, you know, it's a very important thing when, say, the Veterans Review and Appeal Board, they have to be totally above board because, well, that's where disabled veterans deal with this board who is a replacement for the court system. So people shouldn't be lying under oath. The government is telling us, for example, that the service income support insurance plan is Manulife on paper, but in the court case, they said that it was actually, you know, the chief of defense staff. Now, this creates a lot of problems because the courts should have sorted that out. They should have said, what's up with that? You know, why does the government hide behind Manulife? I know that they said they fixed this Manuge case with a contract action, but if I had been involved with it, you know, I'm not a lawyer, but I have read a lot of stuff. If I had been involved with the case and they said they wanted to deal with it as a contract dispute, I would have said, okay, well, who were the parties that negotiated the contract? Oh, the Canadian Forces member didn't have any participation and didn't negotiate the terms of the deal at all. So Section 24A, which says that you can claw back things like the Pension Act pension, well, you did it without the person's consent. And therefore, this is not a valid contract. So therefore, you can't claw back, you know, the Pension Act pension. Same thing applies for all the clawbacks. There was no consent by the parties to the alleged contract. It is the government gaslighting us into believing that, you know, because it's on paper, because it's there, that, you know, they have to do it. Too bad you agreed to it, because that would be the normal case of a contract. If you sat down and negotiated Section 24A of the SISIP policy with Manulife or the Chief of Defense Staff, it's no good to come crying to somebody later and say that ain't fair because you put your mind to it and signed that term of the contract. You know, so too bad, so sad. Anyway, point number 195, periodic. And the unlawful tax when a lump sum, which is not periodic, is paid. Point number A, presumably periodic is related to earnings being periodic because income has to be periodic. That's what I suggest, you know, that Parliament was looking at when it put that word in the Act. The generally accepted accounting rules rely on the spirit of the law. Actually, it's the general anti-avoidance rules. Similar, but not the same. Just came to my mind. The spirit of the law, when they charge someone with obeying the letter of the law, but then the government wants to allege they did something wrong, but charging tax against a lump sum ignores the letter of the fucking law. So the government wants to be able to charge people for, you know, trying to avoid taxes, which in spirit I don't mind. But if you are going to write a law and you put the word periodic in there, and I've been harping on this a lot, I probably had it in another point. I'm thinking about bringing this up to my member of parliament. I'm thinking about going over there and asking them, are they going to allow the executive branch, which is what Canada Revenue Agency is. So are they going to allow the executive branch to ignore what the legislative branch, which is what my member of parliament is getting paid to do after he got elected? They put the word periodic in there, so there is no choice about the people at Canada Revenue Agency charging tax on a lump sum. None. They can't legally do it. So my point about this is that if you have the law being ignored, it detracts from the rule of law. Why should we trust the government when the law that it wrote gets ignored on a regular basis? Now that's the big picture. That's the philosophy behind all this. But in technical legal terms, the word is there, you can't ignore it. Now that only affects some things, but I'm going to skip down to another point I had here because I must have wrote it in on a different day, but I said in number 199, review my own lump sum payments from long-term disability, Sun Life in 2009. So because they never paid me my long-term disability between, say, December 2008 and August of 2009, I got a lump sum from the date that they approved me. Now, because of Section 61F of the Income Tax Act having the word periodic in there, Sun Life should not have included that on the T4A, because they should have known ignorance of the law is no excuse. They should have known that a payment must be periodic in order to be taxed. So because the payment should have been periodic but wasn't made periodically, then they can't tax it. Now, B, Manulife in 2013. Now what happened there was Manulife didn't approve me until 2013. I got medical release on the 19th of January 2012, but Manulife never approved me till March of 2013. So my first payment was a lump sum retroactive payment, and that should not have been taxed. C, Manulife in 2014. Now what happened then is at the 2-year mark, Manulife cut me off like they do to everybody, and then when I got reinstated, they paid me a lump sum in between the period when they cut me off and they reinstated me. Canada Pension Plan Disability in 2014, I put a question mark by that. But the thing is that they gave me retroactive. They gave me a lump sum payment, and it covered, June of 2013 until November of 2014. But it's not a long-term disability, which is why I put a question mark behind it. Sun Life in 2017 or 2018. Now what happened there was I never sent him in the annual verification of disability, which I view as a reapplication. So because I sent in the application or reapplication or the verification form in late, they basically had to pay me almost a whole year worth of insurance. Now they ought to think about which is more important, them getting a piece of paper or me getting continued long-term disability payments. See, they're not looking at this from what's the fairest thing to do here. And Sun Life in 2019 or 2020, it happened again. Not only did I forget the first year, the first time I remembered at the last minute, sent a fax from a member of parliament, his office, and they still screwed it up and never acted on it. So then another year later, 3 or 4 months passed by, and I didn't send in the form, so then I cut up on it and phoned them, and they fixed it. But again, a person who's disabled, unable to work, and getting insurance should not have their payments interrupted because of a technicality. It doesn't help anyone, especially when they're lying about the reason for the form. They want to see if you're alive, because they don't want to send out payments if you're dead, because then they can't collect it after. Or B, are you still disabled? Now the thing about that is they determined under their own process that you are too disabled to work and will continue to get it till age 65. Now, if that's the case, then why, in the name of fuck, do they send out this annual thing? Because that proves that they're not sure. Well, they would say they're not sure, but the fact is disability increases with age, it doesn't decrease. Going back to the point, because I got ahead of myself to link up the two related long-term disability tax issues. Number 196. Wet and whistle here for a second. Tax on QRLSPs, the qualifying retroactive lump sum payments. Perhaps the tax credits being ignored matters. For example, citizens get a basic deduction each year. So basically, our system of taxation has credits and debits. So you get tax credits if, you might have a disability tax credit, but they also give a basic personal exemption amount. So a person who has very little income might pay taxes, have it deducted from their pay, but will get a refund at the end of the year when the taxes are really filed and they didn't exceed their personal tax deduction. So what I was wondering, when they're doing up the qualifying retroactive lump sum payment taxation report, I think it's a T1198, what they do is they put an example of if you filed it normally with no splitting the money up over the years that is indicated. And then B, when they put the tax, if they put it in each year. Now, when you put it in each year, you would have the basic tax deduction every year. And if you put it into that 1 year, you'd only get one basic tax deduction. So I wonder if that was what I meant, because I wrote these things months and months ago. Sounds a bit reasonable. But the thing is it might only be a trivial matter. Again, sometimes I'm wondering if things that seem important to me isn't important to the average person. Number 197, a conversation point. Did the Manuge Federal Court 2012 class action win cause problems for non-Pension Act pension SISIP clients? I don't know. But the thing is that if you're getting the Pension Act pension, they were deducting it from your SISIP. But if you weren't getting the Pension Act pension, you only had things like the Canadian Forces Superannuation Act or the Canada Pension Plan Disability being deducted. Now, this might have been what I was thinking. When they decided that the Pension Act was no longer going to be clawed back, they probably moved on to, are you getting the Canada Pension Plan Disability or are you getting the Canadian Forces Superannuation Act? Then they would have clawed back that amount. So in theory, there are people who might have been veterans or part of the case who won but didn't get any money, because they might have had a high enough Canadian Forces pension, which is not clawed back from the Pension Act, or they might have had a decent Canada Pension Plan Disability, which isn't clawed back from the Pension Act, and then they might have ended up having SISIP clawed back, so they never got their long-term disability insurance, even though they won the case. Now, someone should check into that. Okay, because I don't want to be at this all the time. I feel guilty that I'm not doing as much as I used to. So I'm going to try to get back on the horse. The problem is that, I'm facing the weight of the government, the power of the government. They're trying to tell me and everybody else that I'm wrong when I'm right. Now, I'm not just saying that because I'm egotistical. I can prove I'm right. You can read the word periodic in Income Tax Act Section 61F yourself. And then you got to say, well, everybody knows what periodic is. And then you got to say, well, how come they're taxing it? Well, they want to have their cake and eat it too. They want to have people that get a lump sum pay taxes, and they want to have people that get a periodic payment to pay taxes. They probably think that death and taxes, right? You can't avoid it. Anyway, point number 198, and my last point for this week. Where was the SISIP Manulife concern in 2012 about costs with respect to my son Ryan? So, okay, anyway, I'll continue on and see if I can get my thoughts where I'm at. Well, I was Manulife told me they would not pay because I was getting Sun Life. But if that argument was valid, then Sun Life would pay me less because of Manulife and not vice versa. Okay, well, what I'm thinking about, obviously, because I put a little extra there and the first sentence didn't make sense right away. When I applied for the Manulife SISIP, the Canadian government long-term disability insurance after I was medically released, they said, why are you applying? Because if you got approved, you wouldn't get any money because you told us you're getting Sun Life insurance from working for CRA, and because you're getting $3,300 a month from them, and we will claw that back, you wouldn't get any money from us, even if you were approved. Now, if they had any sense, well, they were hoping I might not notice, I guess. They would have said, well, you're getting the Sun Life since 2009. So therefore, Sun Life might want to take us into account, so we'll make our payment every month, but you contact them to make sure that they deduct the SISIP payment from the Sun Life payment. Now, that never happened. What they said to me was they had the right to do it, and they, were basically not giving me my insurance because of a bullshit argument. Because listen to the common sense of what I said to them and tell me if I'm wrong. It's not common sense. I said, listen here, you bastards. If you have a policy of taking them into account in your contract, and they had the same thing in their contract, then you would take them into account, they would take you into account, and I, despite having 2 insurance plans for 2 different jobs, I wouldn't give a fucking dime, you morons. Now, tell me that's not common sense. Because this is the problem that these people are setting up, is a conflict between themselves with us caught in the middle. Because do they have the right to claw back anything? No. Because Sun Life is a non-indemnity and contributory insurance. Manulife is a non-indemnity and contributory insurance. Now, it is a matter of law that you cannot be clawed back, or you cannot claw back a non-indemnity and contributory payment that is being made in relation to the insurance premium you paid. So they would like to use the rules for an indemnity insurance that compensates you for something. You might have had a car, it got destroyed, therefore you get indemnified for your loss. But long-term disability insurance and life insurance can never be an indemnity contract. And I'm quoting the Scottish Union versus Gwynn, Ontario Superior Court of Appeal, 1963 case. They said that because you can't put a value on human life, then those 2 types of contracts have to be paid on the basis of, does the risk happen? So if you insure against a risk, like your life ending, or you not being able to work, well, if the risk happens and you paid your premiums to get that coverage, you have to get the insurance. Now, what they've done is created a situation where clawbacks reduce or eliminate the insurance, so that basically voids the insurance. And I was going to look up the case, which I think it's in. It might be in the Cunningham versus Wheeler Supreme Court of Canada case, which quoted the Bradburn case. Or it might be in the Ratch versus Bloomer Supreme Court of Canada 1990 case, which quoted Bradburn. But basically, anybody who wants to take insurance into account, like Veterans Affairs does, they are appropriating your insurance premiums. So instead of you getting a benefit from buying insurance, they get the benefit of you buying insurance. That's just flat out unfair, unjust, unethical, and inequitable. They are not supposed to do it because the common law says they can't do it, but they do it anyway. Now, one of these days we'll start looking for a solution, hopefully, I was thinking today, and I'm thinking about changing my broadcast and adding a few different segments instead of just reading off these points. But one of the things I was thinking about doing was talking about some of the solutions that I think we could have. For example, it sounds stupid to me, but we should ask the courts for a declaratory judgment. Okay, so that's them declaring that Matt Edwards is right, that pensions are property and not income. Now, I shouldn't have to do it because that was ruled in the 1990 Clark versus Clark Supreme Court of Canada case. But it seems that the government don't want people believing that pensions are property. And a lot of people claim that pensions are income. But that case ruled on that very issue. So it doesn't need to be relitigated. So it makes me feel stupid to say I want to go to court and get a declaratory judgment, because everybody ought to know it. Anybody who's in this field, anybody who's looked it up, they should know that it's a legal fact that pensions are property. You know, I just thought of it, just crossed my mind. Why the government doesn't like that idea? Because it ruins the idea that they own our pensions. If it's our property and they're holding it on, the law is causing them a headache. Because if we know, like in the Ontario Court of Appeal 1998 case, they said that the federal government pensions are a fiduciary in nature. Now, the government always says that our pensions aren't fiduciary. Well, they might not want them to be, but when you hold on to somebody else's money, you are always a fiduciary. So the Canadian Forces member served. Because of them serving, they were owed money. Instead of them getting all of their money, some of that money was put away for a pension. Now that is their property being held in trust by the government for future use after retirement. That makes the government a fiduciary, which has a higher level of legal responsibility. A fiduciary must look after the interests of the person who they're looking after the money for, with them in mind before they take their own interest into account. So you can't do what's good for you when you're a fiduciary, when you're holding on to somebody else's money. You had to put your mind to what is best for the person who owns the money I'm holding on to. See? Now that goes against the government's claim, and again, another idea just popped into my head. The government claims that it gives us a generous pension. Now, it's not giving us a generous pension when it's giving us back the money that it held after it wrote a law to require us to save for our own retirement. But they want to be seen, optics, they want to be seen as a good government, giving out all these generous benefits. Well, they didn't have to bring in the Canadian Forces Superannuation Act, the Public Service Superannuation Act, and the RCMP Superannuation Act. They could have paid all of the money that the person earned to them and let them worry about their own future. They could have, but they didn't. They stuck their nose into the affairs of their members. And then they took the money and looked after it. Now, in the old days, it was only a paper liability. They never actually put the money into a trust, and they never looked after, investing it or doing whatever. They just basically said they owed the money. But in 2000, they changed that, and they created these funds, and basically they don't do it that way. There's actual money in the accounts now. They shouldn't have been doing it wrong before 2000. But if you think about it, it's common sense. But I bet you $1 million that the government thinks that it is investing the money to save money for the taxpayers, instead of the fact that the contributor, the Canadian Forces, RCMP, and public servants who put the money in there, they ought to be the one who gets any benefit of high stock prices or whatever. But I bet you $1 million the government just uses that to reduce its own contribution. Betcha. Anyway, on that note, I'm going to call it quits for this week. And again, thanks for watching. I mean, I don't want to be doing this. I'm looking at myself in the, reflection of whatever. I don't like hearing my own voice, and I'm doing this hoping that eventually this stuff will be validated, verified, and then they'll start trying to get this stuff fixed. Thanks for watching.